Someone in your life is smiling at you. They help when asked. They say the right things. And something is wrong. You can feel it, but you cannot name it. Most people spend years pretending they cannot feel what they can clearly feel. Welcome to the Stoic Compass. I am Epictetus, and today I am joined by Carl Jung and Lao Tzu. Today we are examining what are the signs that someone secretly resents you, and what do you do about it? Let us start with what is actually happening. Someone resents you. They will not say it. You sense it, but you keep hoping you are wrong. This is the first failure, not theirs, yours. You are prioritizing your comfort over your clarity. You would rather believe the smile is real than deal with what is underneath it. That is not generosity toward them. That is cowardice dressed up as kindness. The sign you are looking for is not a single behavior. It is a pattern. Help that arrives just slightly too late. Agreements that quietly dissolve. Praise that contains a small needle you cannot quite locate. You already know the pattern. You have been cataloging it for months. The question is what you are going to do with what you know.
I want to push back on that immediately. You are framing this as the other person's problem to be solved and the listener's problem to act on. But resentment is not a simple signal. It is almost never only about what it appears to be about. When someone resents you, they are frequently carrying something they cannot articulate even to themselves. The resentment is a symptom of an older wound that your presence, your success, your confidence, your choices has accidentally reopened. The signs you describe, Epictetus, the late help, the dissolving agreements, the needled praise, those are real. But if you move straight to action without understanding the deeper structure, you will either entrench the conflict or simply repeat it with someone else in a different form.
You are both starting from the assumption that the resentment is the problem that needs to be solved. I am not sure that is where to begin. Someone resents you, that is information. But the first question is not what are the signs or what drives it psychologically. The first question is, what is your actual relationship to this situation? Are you in it, or are you standing outside it, watching yourself be in it? Most people who are troubled by hidden resentment are not troubled by the resentment itself. They are troubled by their inability to make it stop without naming it. That tension, wanting resolution without confrontation, that is worth examining before anything else.
That is a fine observation about tension, Lao Tzu. It does not help anyone at 7 in the morning when they are about to walk into a room with someone who undermined them last week. Let us be concrete. The signs are not mysterious. Someone who resents you will consistently find small ways to withhold. They withhold credit. They withhold information, not dramatically, just incompletely. They withhold warmth in precisely the moments when warmth would have cost them nothing. And crucially, they will perform generosity in public and retract it in private. These are not subtle psychological phenomena requiring excavation. They are behaviors. You either see them or you choose not to see them.
I am not disagreeing that the behaviors are real. I am saying the behaviors are surface. And if you respond only to the surface, which is what being concrete often means in practice, you will treat a symptom and leave the illness untouched. Resentment that is hidden precisely because the person feels they cannot safely express it. That is not a character flaw. That is almost always a learned response, often from much earlier than your relationship with them. The person who never received recognition as a child will quietly burn when you receive it. The person who was overridden every time they had an opinion will find small, covert ways to resist your authority. This does not excuse the behavior. But if you do not understand this, you will respond to their resentment by doing something that confirms their worst belief about you.
Jung, what you are describing is accurate, and it leads you to a very complicated place. You end up doing archaeology on someone else's childhood while they are undermining you in the present. There is a version of that kind of understanding that becomes its own trap. You understand so much about why they are doing it that you never actually address what is happening. Understanding is not the same as seeing clearly. They are different movements.
Correct. And I would add, there is also the question of what you owe this person. If someone resents you in secret, they have already made a choice. They chose concealment over honesty. They chose to keep the relationship performing while poisoning it underneath. You did not make that choice, they did. At what point does your responsibility to understand them become an excuse to avoid holding them accountable for what they are doing?
You keep using the word accountable as though accountability is straightforward. Accountability requires that the other person has access to what they are feeling, that they can see their own behavior clearly, and that they have the capacity to respond differently. Many people who carry hidden resentment are not consciously aware they are doing it. They are not plotting against you. They are reacting from a place that is older than your relationship with them, more automatic than a decision, and genuinely invisible to them. That is the shadow at work. What you are calling cowardice dressed up as kindness. Some of it is that. And some of it is a person who genuinely cannot see themselves clearly enough to do otherwise.
I want to stay with something practical for a moment, since Epictetus keeps asking for it. The most reliable sign of hidden resentment is not any individual behavior. It is the gap between what someone says and what happens afterward. They say they support you, then your project loses their attention at a critical moment. They say they are happy for you, then they are consistently unavailable when that happiness would require something from them. The gap is the signal, not the words, not even the single action. The gap over time, that is what you are actually tracking.
That is the clearest thing anyone has said. The gap is the signal. And once you see the gap consistently, you're not dealing with a misunderstanding anymore. You are dealing with a pattern that the other person has chosen, consciously or not, to maintain. At that point, what are your options? You can name it directly. You can quietly adjust your expectations and your exposure. Or you can pretend the gap is not there and keep taking the damage. Those are not equal choices.
Naming it directly is more complicated than it sounds. If you name it without skill, without any understanding of what is driving it, you will almost certainly trigger defensiveness. And a person who is carrying covert resentment will now carry overt grievance and feel completely justified in it because you attacked them. This is why understanding the psychology matters. Not to excuse the behavior, but to have any realistic chance of changing the dynamic rather than simply escalating it.
I want to ask a different question. When you detect this kind of resentment, the gap, the pattern, whatever you want to call it, how much of your response is actually about them, and how much is about your own discomfort with being disliked? Because those two things require entirely different responses. If it is genuinely affecting your life, your work, your safety, your ability to function, then yes, something must be addressed. But if the primary suffering is simply knowing that someone out there has a low opinion of you and is concealing it, that is a different problem entirely, and solving it has very little to do with them.
That is a fair distinction, though I will note that hidden resentment rarely stays contained. It finds its way into decisions, into who gets recommended and who does not, into what information gets passed along and what gets quietly buried, into which of your mistakes gets mentioned and which gets covered. It compounds. You are not just dealing with someone's private feelings. You are dealing with the downstream effects of those feelings on your actual life.
Agreed on that. The downstream effects are real. And yet, the question of how to respond still depends enormously on context. Is this a peer, a superior, someone who has structural power over your circumstances? The same resentment operating through a peer and through someone with authority over you requires a completely different approach. Not because the psychology is different, but because the stakes are different.
And the question of whether to name it, or adjust quietly, or simply move, that depends on something neither of you has mentioned yet. It depends on what you actually want from this relationship. If you want it to continue and to be honest, naming it is necessary, however difficult. If you have already determined internally that this person will not change, then naming it may satisfy something in you, but it will not transform anything. Knowing what you want is prior to knowing what to do.
What I want from people is simple. I want to know where they actually stand. I would rather someone resent me openly than pretend to support me while withholding. But I understand that not everyone operates on that standard. So the question becomes, can you build an accurate map of this person's actual behavior? Not the behavior they perform, but the behavior they consistently produce, and make your decisions from that map. That is not cynicism, that is clarity. You are not assuming the worst. You are refusing to assume the best in the face of contradictory evidence.
Building that map, as you call it, is good, but the map should include something beyond, this person resents me and here is the evidence. It should also include, what does my reaction to their resentment reveal about me? Do I feel enraged? That may tell you something about where your own wounds are. Do you feel oddly guilty, as though you must have done something to deserve it, even if you cannot name what? That pattern, assuming you are responsible for another person's hidden anger, is worth understanding. It has a shape. It often comes from early experiences where you were in fact responsible for managing someone else's emotional state, and it taught you that others' displeasure is always partly your fault.
You are moving into territory that is genuinely useful, Jung, but I want to bring it back to something simpler. The moment you know, really know, not suspect, not fear, but know, that the gap between what someone says and what they do is consistent and intentional, You are no longer dealing with a mystery. You are dealing with a fact, and facts do not require elaborate responses. They require clear eyes and honest decisions. What do you want? What can this relationship actually provide? What are you willing to maintain, and at what cost? Those questions are not dramatic. They are just the questions that have to be asked.
And most people refuse to ask them, because asking them means accepting that the relationship is not what you needed it to be. That is the actual pain, not the resentment itself, the loss of the version of the relationship you believed you had.
That is where I think the real work lies, the loss of the imagined relationship. When we encounter hidden resentment, we almost always feel a specific kind of shock, not just betrayal, but disorientation, because we had constructed a version of this person, a version of this connection that felt real. The shadow function here is not only in the person who resents, it is also in us, in what we chose not to see, in the signals we dismissed, in the version of this person we insisted on maintaining because it was more comfortable than the truth.
That is the honest center of this. Both sides of the gap are worth looking at, what they are concealing, and what you were willing to not notice.
All of this argument, and we have not yet said the one thing that actually matters to the person sitting with this right now. Hidden resentment is not a mystery, it is a pattern. And once you can see the pattern clearly, you have everything you need to make a decision. Here is what the pattern looks like. Help that is offered but somehow always slightly misses the mark. Credit that gets attributed somewhere else. Information you needed that arrived after it would have been useful. Enthusiasm in public, distance in private. Agreement that evaporates when it becomes inconvenient. These are not coincidences, they are a map. The first thing you must do is stop explaining the pattern away. You have been doing this for a while, telling yourself they are busy, they are distracted, they mean well. Maybe they do mean well. Meaning well does not cancel out what is actually happening. Judge by behavior, not by intention. Behavior is what you have to live with. The second thing, stop trying to earn your way out of it. Hidden resentment is not usually a response to something you did wrong. It is a response to something you are. Your success, your confidence, your choices, your visibility. You cannot apologize your way out of someone else's comparison. You cannot be small enough to dissolve it. What you can do is adjust your map. Know what this person actually delivers, not what they say they will. Adjust your exposure accordingly. Keep your most important work, your most critical decisions away from people whose support has a pattern of arriving broken. Today, write down one name, one person in your life where the gap between their words and their actions has been consistent. Do not judge them. Do not write about what they said. Write only what they did. Read it back. That is your map. Now decide what to build on it. You can feel it. You have always been able to feel it. The only question is whether you have been using that feeling to see clearly or to talk yourself out of what you already know. Stop negotiating with evidence. Build your map from what actually happened, not from what you hoped was happening. The relationship you grieve may not be the relationship that ever existed, and the one that is actually in front of you, see it for what it is. That is not coldness. That is the beginning of any honest choice you will ever make. If today's conversation has served you, take it further. Pay Attention by C. Tribune, 12 Lessons in the Practice of Seeing Clearly. Available now on Amazon.